Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the hidden, honestly miraculous complexity of a seemingly simple, everyday movement. We do it all the time without even thinking, but the mechanics behind it, absolutely fascinating.
I want you to physically mimic bringing a glass of water to your lips right now. Seriously, try it. Just hold your hand out and bring it in. Now think about the precise mechanics required to keep from pouring it everywhere. Have you ever actually missed your mouth? It takes this incredibly coordinated dance of joints and bones to make sure that water lands exactly where it's supposed to without a single spill.
To freeze frame and decode this simple act of taking a sip, we're going to look through the scientific lens of kinematics. Basically, kinematics describes the motion or displacement of our body's segments. For our purposes, we're just assuming our bones act as rigid levers, and we're analyzing their movement through space without worrying about the actual muscular forces causing the movement. Make sense?
Section 1. Translating versus rotating. Let's establish the types of displacement.
So we have two foundational ways any rigid segment in our body can move. First up is translatory motion. Think of this as linear displacement, where a segment moves in a straight line and every single point on it travels the exact same distance in parallel paths. Compare that to rotatory motion, or angular displacement, which is movement around a fixed axis in a curved path. But here's the kicker. Pure translatory or pure rotatory motion almost never actually happens in human movement. Since our body segments are linked together, our motions are almost always a combination of the two.
Moving to Section 2. Degrees of freedom are options for movement.
To locate the exact displacement of our glass in space, we have to look at the invisible 3D grid our arm navigates. And that brings us to the magic number 6. Any completely unconstrained segment in space has exactly 6 degrees of freedom. Think of these as the potential options for movement available to it at any given moment.
So where do these 6 degrees come from? Well, they come from our ability to either translate along or rotate around 3 specific axes. Imagine these anchored right at the center of mass of the human body. We've got the x-axis, also known as the coronal axis, running side to side. Then there's the y-axis, or vertical axis, going straight up and down. And finally, the z-axis, or AP axis, running front to back. An unconstrained segment can slide along or spin around each of these 3 lines. That's your 6 degrees of freedom, right there.
Section 3. The perfect sip, combining motions.
Now, what's really cool is how we apply these rules to hitting that perfect sip of water. Let's view your forearm, your hand, and the glass as one single rigid segment. To successfully get it to your mouth, you need 2 simultaneous degrees of freedom. First, your forearm rotates around a coronal axis right at the elbow joint. Second, your shoulder joint translates that entire forearm hand segment forward in space along the AP axis. By combining just these 2 degrees of freedom, elbow rotation and shoulder translation, that glass follows a beautiful, perfect, curvilinear path right to your lips.
And you know, this brilliantly illustrates the concept of an instantaneous center of rotation, or ICR. Because we're combining joint movements, rotating at the elbow while the shoulder translates the arm forward, the axis of rotation isn't perfectly fixed. It shifts constantly in space from moment to moment as the glass moves. It's literally creating a shifting, moving axis on the fly.
Section 4. Pouring and twisting. Complex 3D motion.
Let's escalate the complexity and see what happens when we take the glass away from the mouth to empty it. If you turn it over to pour, you're stepping into complex 3-dimensional motion. The forearm hand segment rotates, or extends, around the coronal axis at the elbow, and it translates backward. But now we add a 3rd degree of freedom, pronation. By adding just one more variable, turning the forearm, we completely shift from a simple planar motion to a 3D motion. This multidimensional movement happens around what we call a helical, or screw axis. And just like before, the center of rotation is continuously shifting as you pour.
Section 5. Anatomy of a mistake. When segments fail. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what goes wrong when our body's linked parts don't work together like they usually do. Let's run a quick thought experiment. Imagine fixing your humerus, your upper arm bone, completely in place, so your shoulder cannot translate forward at all. Now try to lift the glass relying entirely on the biceps muscle to do all the work. What do you think happens?
Well, because the shoulder is locked up and can't translate, we have a major problem with our degrees of freedom. The intended main motion is flexion, bending the elbow around the coronal axis. But the biceps muscle doesn't just flex. It also supinates, or twists, the forearm around a longitudinal axis. This secondary, completely unavoidable twisting is what we call a coupled motion. And without the shoulder's translating degree of freedom to adjust the path and compensate for that twist, the coupled twisting motion completely takes over. The 3D nature of the movement becomes very evident because the glass completely misses your mouth and boom, you've just thrown your drink right onto your own shoulder. It's kind of a hilarious visual, but it hits the nail on the head. It perfectly shows why our segments have to be unconstrained enough to properly combine translatory and rotatory motions.
Section 6. The reality of motion. Let's get into our final takeaways.
Summarizing what we've learned from the physics of a sip, we can see that pure, single-axis motion is basically a myth when it comes to the human body. Because our segments are all linked up, our joint rotations actually occur around a series of shifting, instantaneous centers of rotation. Every single everyday movement is just this beautifully complex, multi-dimensional, curvilinear dance combining translation and rotation.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to end on. Knowing how many shifting axes, coupled motions, and degrees of freedom are required just to successfully take a single sip of water, how many degrees of freedom are you using to simply nod your head along with this explainer right now? The sheer complexity of your own biomechanics is happening every single second. Keep wondering about it and keep exploring.